I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and in this job there are good days and there are great days, and this is one of the latter, I reckon, because I'm about to get my first drive of this. This is the new Hyundai Ioniq 5N. Now Chasing Cars has already tested this car in its home market in South Korea, but we've got this production version of the Australian specification, which differs from cars sold elsewhere because of the map in its electronically controlled suspension. Now, even though the Ioniq 5N is intensely powerful, seriously fast in a straight line, its engineers for the last 3 or 4 years of development have concentrated on driving fun. This is meant to be a great car on a windy, bumpy road. So that's exactly where we've taken it outside Sydney in today's video. Can you really have fun in this 2-ton plus EV? We're gonna find out. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by All right, let's take the Ioniq 5N out for a drive on a really tough bit of road north of Sydney, which is where the Hyundai team does some of their suspension tuning, particularly when they receive cars here in Australia to ensure that the suspension is going to be right for our market. And in the case of the Ioniq 5N, most of the suspension tuning work was done in Germany, in South Korea, and in America. And the crack team that was responsible for the suspension and steering of this car included an Australian from Hyundai Australia's engineering group locally in Sydney. So he decamped overseas, helped get our priorities or the requirements of our roads into the car. And what I will say first and foremost is that I think it's really clear to see that Australian influence in the finished product, because we are on a classic Australian B road here, and the level of compliance, the level of competence, the level of control in the vehicle is really quite staggering. And wow. The only thing I can compare it to is the first time I drove a Porsche Taycan on a road like this, which really reset my expectations about what an EV can do, what a heavy EV can do in terms of compliance and body control. The Ioniq 5N really becomes the second vehicle, perhaps the third after the Audi e-tron GT, which fundamentally is super similar to a Taycan. This is really something quite special and a level well above, I would say, a Kia EV6 GT. Even though they share a platform, they share some hardware, I think the Ioniq 5N is a fundamentally different beast. So what we're running here is Mando electronically controlled suspension, and we've also got electric power steering, so there's plenty of parameters that can be adjusted on a car like this. And what I've been shown today with some help of an engineer with a laptop with a program that can control the suspension is what happens when you send the suspension to complete soft and also to complete hard. So the car has its own drive modes, all of which have different software parameters in them, which are actually unique for Australia when it comes to the suspension. But using the computer program, you can actually ignore all of those and make the suspension go completely soft or completely hard, so you can see the inherent goodness in the damping, ignoring the software. And that's an eye-opening experience, because in completely soft, it's too boaty, it's too lacking in control, and in completely hard, it's really quite unpleasant. But what we see there are the extremes of what the suspension is able to do, and that's really enlightening, if only to show us that the way the car is set up in its various modes is such a nicely tailored manifestation of those parameters. Now, I'm just driving the suspension in normal mode right now, and what we're getting is just uncanny levels of compliance. This car doesn't have air ride, it doesn't have things like 48-volt anti-roll bars, it has effectively an adaptive electronically controlled suspension, and it does an amazing job at containing motion very quickly, pulling the body back in, no pogoing, no under-damping front or rear in this car, but nor is it over-damped. You can tell how much time and effort has been put into this vehicle. The development has been 3 or 4 years, a lot of time spent road testing, a lot of time at the proving ground, and it's not been for nothing, that's for sure. I think this is, a big surprise for me is looking at the Ioniq 5N. It doesn't look that dailyable to me. It's on massive wheels and tires. I was expecting it would need to be seriously stiff in order to contain all of that weight, but that's just not the case. Considerably ahead of a stock Ioniq 5 in terms of the balance that's been able to be achieved in the ride of this car. The regular Ioniq 5, it does ride well, but there are a couple of moments where you think it can be a little bit underdamped on Australian roads. That's been 100% bypassed in the Ioniq 5N. The control compliance balance is really, really good. I think a Taycan or an RS e-tron DT is still ahead of this car in terms of, being a higher plateau of ride handling, but they are double, triple, quadruple the price. So very much getting along with the ride and handling. What about the rest of the package? Well, gobs of power, very, very quick car, quicker than anyone would need in Australia. But I've never met an EV quite like this, where the software has been finessed to such an extent to make such a fast and powerful EV feel really drivable and not overpowered in environments like this. This is a tight, technical bit of road. The car could easily feel too fast. Something like an MG4 X Power, which is like half the price of this car, does feel too fast on roads like this. But the mapping that's been put into the drive modes, into the throttle, and into a couple of interesting special features in this car actually make it feel maybe a bit less powerful than it is when you want it. Now, if you go into boost mode, you launch it off the line, this will be a car in the 3-second range easily. It is quick, but you actually don't want that ridiculous leap forward acceleration at all times. And you don't really want it on a road like this. You want a bit more linearity and a bit more nuance in the pedal, and that's exactly what's been engineered here. So we have an artificial DCT transmission. That sounds stupid, it sounds lame, but I can look you dead in the eye and tell you the absolute truth, which is that I think this setup is making me a better driver in this car on roads like this, because I've got shift points. They're artificial, but they're there, and they're so well tuned acoustically and in terms of feel through the pedals that I feel like they're real, and it's helping me judge my corner entry speed. It's helping me understand how much power I need to lay down on the way out. Maybe it's because I'm used to combustion. Maybe there'll be people in future that don't really need this. But for me right now, it's helping massively. I'm just absolutely shocked that this is the reaction I'm having. It's the opposite of thinking it's lame. It actually works really well. And the sound itself is so well calibrated that I kind of didn't even realize when I started driving that there was this artificial sound, which is produced both outside and inside the car, by the way. This is fun. Doesn't feel its weight or its size. It sounds natural. It drives naturally. The steering, not the last word in pure feel. A Taycan remains, noticeably ahead of an Ioniq 5N in terms of steering feel, but it's pretty good. The amount of grip is staggering, but you can actually tweak the rear end. ESC Sport and ESC Off are both available in this car. There's a drift optimizer. We'll play with that later, where drifting is a smarter idea than here on the public road. I'm not sure really what I can say at this stage beyond the fact that this is a natural driving experience. And in an EV that is so hard to pull off, there are very few cars that have done it. I think we all know that Tesla has done a super impressive job at mainstreaming electrification and full BEVs. And the Model 3 remains one of the most recommendable cars on the market. But this Ioniq 5N sweeps aside a Model 3 performance or a Model Y performance in terms of driving fun and engagement. Layering of software, but also absolute finessing of hardware for years has produced this result, where a difficult Australian B road can be tackled seemingly with ease. But it's not easy to get to this point. It requires massive dedication and smarts with tuning this hardware and the software that goes along with it to get to the point where a road like this is inherently drivable and quickly, while still feeling safe, feeling confident. This is mighty impressive. I think this car could go far. I think this car could convert a lot of people that might currently think EV isn't for them. I think this is going to shock the pants off them. It's shocked me. Looking forward to driving this car on a range of roads on a week-long test for chasing cars after it's launched. But based on first impressions, I'm blown away. This is good.